Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion about ministry, and I want to tell you a story about a village on the top of a very high, steep cliff. These villagers had to journey down this mountain in order to find food in the valley and water, and they had a problem. It was a very serious problem, especially in the rainy season as they came down the mountain. And it was slippery. Sometimes they would slip and fall and injure themselves. Sometimes they would fall a long ways and some would actually die. So there was a short-term team that came from the United States and witnessed this problem. While the team was there, one of the villagers fell. And so the team decided to come up with a solution. They got their heads together. And they thought that since when people fell to the bottom of the hill, there was no way to get them to the hospital, a good solution would be an ambulance. So they bought an ambulance, and they parked it down at the bottom of the hill, put gas in it, and trained a villager to drive the vehicle, and went back. The villagers were happy with this solution, and the short-term team felt very good that they had really made a contribution to the needs of the people. Well, some time went by, and the ambulance sat at the bottom of the hill. Tires began to get flat. One day they needed the ambulance, and they came down and turned the key, and the engine wouldn't start. And so the villagers got together, and they decided that they really needed to contact this short-term team and let them know that their ambulance was breaking down. And so they contacted the short-term team. The short-term team sent out some money, and this went on for a long time until finally the short-term team decided, we really need to just back out of this. It's not working. And so we'll just tell the villagers that we're done. They have to take responsibility now for this ambulance. What do you hear in that story?
Seems like they saw the need, but it didn't seem like it was important enough for them to do something about it.
It wasn't important enough for the villagers to do something about it.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
It could be that it was important to them, but they didn't really know what to do about it, or they didn't feel like they were capable of doing something about it. But it seemed as if they were happy for somebody else to do something about it. So at least they cared a little bit, because they were glad that something had been done to help.
Right. So they didn't really feel there was something they could do about it, but they were very happy that somebody else would take this problem on. Okay. What else?
That was what came to my mind, is that they seemed to be very happy to let the outsiders come in and do it.
The villagers were happy to let the outsiders deal with the problem. Yeah.
It sounds like also that when they got the ambulance for the bottom of the hill, it was helping the people that had fallen and were injured, but they didn't do anything to help for the people that were falling in the first place, falling down the hill in the first place.
Okay. So in a sense, it didn't deal with the real problem. It was putting a Band-Aid on their sores, but it wasn't stopping them from falling down the mountain.
Right.
Well, this story has a second chapter, and I want to tell you that chapter now. After the ambulance episode, there was a church not in the village, but with a burden for the village, some distance away, who came and decided that they were going to help the villagers solve this problem. And so they got their heads together and they decided, well, if we can't get them to the hospital using the ambulance, then maybe what we need to do is build a clinic at the bottom of the hill. And so that's what they did. They built a clinic at the bottom of the hill. And the villagers didn't have a doctor in their midst, or a nurse, or anyone who could staff the clinic. So the church then had to take it on themselves to staff this clinic. And so they went out and they found a nurse to staff the clinic. And one nurse wasn't enough. They needed somebody there 24 hours a day. And They also had to provide drugs and this kind of thing, and it got to be very expensive. And this church, as good-hearted as they were and as much as they wanted to help the people, came to the realization that they couldn't pay the bill for the drugs and the nurse to take care of this clinic perpetually. And so they too had to quit and back away. Now, what do you see happening in this second chapter of the story?
It seems like whenever something went wrong, the villagers would go to the outsiders.
Whenever something went wrong, the villagers went to the outsiders and asked them to fix it. Okay? Yeah.
Well, it seems like that because they always went to the outsiders, they really didn't own it. They wanted somebody else to solve their problem. And so since they didn't own it, somebody else had to always fix the problem.
So they had no ownership in the solution. In a sense, they were depending on somebody else rather than taking responsibility themselves. They were depending on somebody else to do the work for them. Well, when the church pulled out, the villagers got together and they began to talk to each other. And there was an old man who stood and said to the village, I actually had a solution to the real problem before these outsiders came. But in all the excitement and all that the outsiders were bringing, I couldn't get you to listen. It would have taken a little bit of investment from us, but we could have solved this problem. The real problem, said the old man, is not the injuries at the bottom of the hill. It's the fact that people are falling off the top of the hill. And here's what I propose. I propose that we build a fence using materials that we have right here on the trail, so that when somebody slips and falls, they'll fall into the fence and they won't injure themselves at all. And obviously the village was glad to see that there was a solution, that there was something that they could do. They took responsibility. They used their own resources, their own initiative, and they put up the fence, and the injuries and the deaths stopped. And not only that, but when the fence posts rotted, they went and took responsibility themselves to fix it. Now, what was the difference between the first two chapters in this story and the last one? Yeah.
Well, they were self-sufficient. They were
Okay.
able to provide their own solution and to keep it going.
So they found a solution that was their own. Back to what was said earlier, they took ownership and responsibility and initiative. Very important concepts.
Also, the final solution dealt with prevention rather than, trying to deal with the consequences of the problem. It dealt with the root of the problem instead of the fruit of the problem.
Oh, so the solution that the villagers used focused on prevention rather than cure, went to the roots of the problem, is what you said.
And they used resources that they had locally themselves instead of having to bring to build the fence. They used their own materials and they used stuff that they could replace.
Yes.
They didn't have to rely on
They used-
outside support or materials. They used what they had.
They used local resources. So now we're going to allow you to continue this discussion at home and see what further we can learn from this story. Before we turn you loose to do that, though, I just want to do another thing here. This key, it's actually a rental car key, but it represents a problem. And I am a villager, and you are an outsider coming to me. I'm holding the problem. But my tendency, when I see you coming, is to say, that's the solution to my problem, right? And so what I'm going to do then is when the outsider comes in, I'm going to throw my problem Now, what just happened? That exchange,
You got rid of the problem and gave it to the outsider to solve.
right? So who's holding the problem now?
The outsider's holding the
The
problem.
outsider's holding the problem. Who's going to be thinking about a solution to the problem?
The outside.
The outsider's going to be thinking about the solution. Whose resources are going to be used to solve the problem?
The outsider.
The outsider. And what's going to happen to the outsider eventually?
They throw the problem back.
He's going to get tired. He's going to buckle under the pressure because we can't carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. And so, in order for our programs to be sustainable, we need to have ownership by the community. And that's what we're going to talk about as you go into your small groups.